Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to another episode of Quran in English. My name is Ahmed, and I'm happy to take you through the next section of Surah Al Ahzab. What an interesting section that we have today. It's only, 9 verses? But it's like lots of stuff to talk about. It's wild. But before I get into it, let me explain what I'm doing here. I'm learning how to read the Quran. I'm discussing what I have learned because I find that that's the best way for me to learn. So I'm sharing my learning journey with you. If you like that, great. If you don't, okay. All right. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Where did we last leave off? It was talking about the Prophet and made lawful to his wives and who he could marry and who he couldn't marry. And I was like, why are there so many exceptions? Well, good news. We continue talking about it today. All right. Let's start with the verse. ترجى من تشاء منهن تؤوي إليك من تشاء ومن ابتغيت ممن عزلت فلا جناح عليك ذلك أدنى أن تقر أعينهن ولا يحزن ويرضين بما آتيتهن كلهن والله يعلم ما في قلوبكم وكان الله عليما حليما. Okay, so continuing, saying first the previous verse said who he can marry. He's allowed to marry these specific people, which I was thinking of, why does he get so many choices? And these are specific choices that were available to him for you, but not for the rest of the believers. Which I was like, why are we making so many exceptions? So first it starts with the exceptions of what he can do, and it tells him what you're allowed to do and what you can do. And then it says the constraints and the limitations on what he has to do. So there is a counterside to this, to the advantage that was given to him, so to speak. But here, what is it saying? You may defer whom you will, you may delay whom you will from them, from the wives, and you may take to whom you will. So the Prophet has choice in terms of who he can marry and who he can push away. But here they're even saying you could delay or receive whoever you please of your wives. The way that I understood it when I was first reading it is that because they were given the choice of who you can marry, then it is his choice to turn away some and accept some. That's how I understood it, but that's not how the translation here is saying it. But again, all it says is you may defer and you may take. So it could be understood in the concept that, you take with the wives that you choose and you defer the wives that you don't. It could be within the context of marriage, but I think within the context of marriage, he also has to be fair to all of them. The only way that he can marry all of them is by following the rules that have been set in Surah An-Nisa chapter 4, which is that he must treat them all fairly. I don't think he's exempt from those rules, for example. And it says, and whoever you desire from those you had set aside, then there is no blame upon you, which again, this ties into both explanations. Is it from the wives that you have, that you push away and you pull, and then all of a sudden you pull them back? Or from the ones that you decided not to marry, and then later you wanted to marry them? Could you marry them? You could. That's how I understood it in the context of marrying, but they're translating it in the context of, in the context of being with the wives. This footnote actually gives us a wonderful view of the Prophet's life and marriage. The Prophet's married life can be classified as the following. Until the age of 25, he was single. So there's still hope for everybody, because 25 back then was like 40, 50 today. 25 to 50, he was married to only Khadija. And she kind of, she was his everything. She was the matron of the household. She kind of, she provided. She gave him like work opportunities. Their relationship was very beautiful and very fantastic, and he revered her quite a lot. And she was quite older than him. And then 50 to 52, he was single after Khadija's death. And then 53 to the death at the age of 63, he had a total of 10 wives. Many of these marriages were to widows who had been left with the children without a provider, and in some cases to foster stronger ties with some of his companions in neighboring tribes. Of all the women he married, Aisha was the only virgin. And there's something special about Aisha. I don't quite know how to describe it to you, but I get a feeling about Aisha that is like positive and good and holy, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's just my bias because I have a cousin named Aisha, but like it's not how I feel about my cousin. um, yeah, there's just something special about this. Anyway, yeah, you pull who you want, and you push away who you want, and you pull who you want, and you if you want to seek someone after you've pushed them aside, then it's fine. That is more suitable for you. That their eyes may be cooled, and they do not grieve, and they may be pleased from what you have given them, all of them. So this again, if you read it for its face value, it sounds like it's talking about him satisfying one wife versus not satisfying the other. But it also doesn't make sense. That is more likely that they will be content, not grieved, and satisfied with what you offer them. Why would they be satisfied of being pushed away and then coming to them afterwards? I don't know. These verses I cannot claim to understand completely. But God knows what is in your hearts, the prophet and the wise, and God was all-knowing and most forbearing. What does forbearing mean? Patient and restrained. Okay. And then it talks into what is not lawful for him. لا يحل لك النساء من بعد لا يحل لك النساء من بعد ولا أن تبدل بهن من أزواج ولو أعجبك حسنهن إلا ما ملكت يمينك وكان الله على كل شيء رقيبا. Again, a lot of things confuse me. But it says, it is not lawful for you to... Here now they're talking about marrying women after this. So doesn't this have to be about marriage in order for the after this to make sense? I feel like I'm missing a crucial piece of information. Anyway, it says, it's not lawful for you to marry women from after this. And if I read this in context, then doesn't this mean that he's not allowed to marry someone other than he's paid those dowries and bondwomen in possession God has granted to you, and you're allowed to marry the daughters of your paternal uncles and aunts and daughters of your maternal uncles and aunts who have emigrated like you? It all goes a bit over my head a bit sometimes. It's a bit hard to digest. But anyway, it's not lawful for you, any women after this, and you're not allowed to exchange them for any other wives, even if it pleases you their beauty, except what you rightfully possess. Which, what does this mean? Because didn't we talk about the ma malakat aymanuhum in the first condition? So wouldn't you can't marry after this also include what your right hand possesses? Why would you repeat it? And is it talking about something completely different because we talked about this, but then it's back to talking about marriage? I don't know. It's confusing. I don't understand. And God was over everything an observer. He was watching over them. But again, like, it kind of indicates that there is a limit that is being set. That is one thing that I can tell you. There is a limit that is being set on the prophet, that you can't just marry whoever you want, and you can't just go with whatever you want. It's not, these rules weren't designed so that he could just get all in the way that I described it in the previous episode, where it sounded a bit culty, like, oh, the leader can gets more privileges than the people below him. And also, what I haven't paid attention to, but I have learned over the last... I have repaid attention to over the last 24 hours, is that not everything that you think is a blessing is a blessing. The concept of having to marry multiple people, you might think, oh, he's getting exceptions. He can do whatever he wants. And you might be missing the point that marriage is hard work. Relationships are hard work. And we are going to see an example of the prophet being taxed energy-wise. So like we might be looking at the good of these things and not understanding the obligation of these things, and that just means he has more responsibilities and more things to kind of deal with. And it was said in the previous verses, this is more likely that they will be content, not grieved, and satisfied with what you offer them. While I don't fully understand it, that is kind of the perspective that this is all happening for. It's designed to build connections, foster connections, and make sure that the women's needs, because that's the word, is women's needs are met. And then it creates more conditions as to how to kind of preserve that. But it's a bit interesting. It's a bit complex. Yeah. All right. Here comes the conditions for how do we protect the sanctity of these marriages with the Prophet specifically. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تدخلوا بيوت النبي إلا أن يؤذن لكم إلى طعام غير ناظرين إناه ولكن إذا دعيتم فادخلوا فإذا طعمتم فانتشروا ولا مستأنسين لحديث إن ذلكم كان يؤذي النبي فيستحي منكم والله لا يستحي من الحق وإذا سألتموهن متاعا فاسألوهن من وراء حجاب ذلكم أطهر لقلوبكم وقلوبهن وما كان لكم أن تؤذوا رسول الله ولا أن تنكحوا أزواجه من بعده أبدا إن ذلكم كان عند الله عظيما. Okay, a lot of things are being said in this one verse. Alright. O ye of those who believe, do not enter the houses of the prophets, except when it is given permission for you. And for food without waiting its preparation. So except for you, if it's given permission for you for food, but not before the meal is ready. Don't come too early and linger. But yeah, it's saying a lot in this very short. They're so condensed with meaning. It's kind of amazing. Don't come to the houses unless it's given permission for you for food, but not before it's ready. But if you are invited, then enter, and when the food is finished, then when you are fed, when you have eaten, then disperse, leave, and do not seek to remain for conversation. Because again, we're talking about the prophet who spread the religion. You kind of have the unfortunate consequence of him being the ultimate idol of the time. And not an idol in the sense that we're worshipping idols, but an idol in the sense that everybody knows them and everybody wants to hear and feel and connect because they revere this person so much. Which then, of course, like if you were with somebody very interesting, you want to get as much from them as possible. So here it's setting the conditions that if you're invited for dinner, don't come too early and leave after you're done eating. And it'll explain why in a second. Indeed, that is because it was troubling, it was harming the prophet. Then he is shy of dismissing you. Then he's, which, listen, as an introvert who has a lot of extroverted capabilities, every time I'm around my friends, I tell them, "Oh, I'm introverted." They go like, "You're not introverted," and I'm like, "Yeah, I get energy when you leave me alone at home." When I'm not with anybody else. When I'm with other people, I'm giving energy and it's exhausting. And they're like, "No, you're not an introvert because you have all this, the characteristics, the charisma, the charm, the whatever." And I'm like, "Okay, but you're missing the point. I am exhausted when I'm with you, because when I'm with you, I'm constantly giving in that sense. So I have to be by myself in order to give to myself because I can't take from anyone. I'm not built that way." So I have never related to the prophet more in my life than someone who is too shy to tell people, "Go home." And because they stayed too long, you've overstayed your welcome. I need to be alone. And like in the context of being alone is like being alone with your wives, and yeah, like I completely understand that. It's just, I don't know. It's just so humanizing, and that he's too shy to tell you to go home. And then it says, but God is not shy. God is not shy from the truth. Yeah, God will tell you, you've overstayed your welcome. This is too much. Which there's something to be learned about that as well. If we can kind of embody communicating truth and doing it in a way, because a lot of times the prophet's shy because the Middle Eastern culture is built on honor and respect and not making someone feel bad and not making someone feel like they've overstayed their welcome, because then you make them feel bad, then you've offended them, then they had to have their own sensibilities. There's so many intricacies when it comes to relationships, specifically in Bedouin times and specifically in Middle Eastern culture. But there needs to be a better way for us to communicate so that we can communicate our own limitations. Another point that you may not notice is that in the Arab culture, to be generous is a measure of your own worth, in a way. The more generous you are, the more worthy that you'll be. And so sometimes Middle Eastern men or Middle Eastern people tend to overemphasize their ability to be hospitable in order to be seen as generous. Because the more generous they are, the better relations that they can have with other people and the more success that they can have. Therefore, generosity is very important. So telling someone, oh, I have to cut my hospitality short because you have to go, can sometimes feel like you're not being hospitable, you're not being generous, and you're being against the values of what our society deems important. So there's a lot of nuance in it, but God does not shy away from the truth. And I still would like to embody a bit more of my newfound Dutch culture to marry with my old Middle Eastern culture. Respect the other person, but also respect yourself. And that somewhere in between both is the right level to taking care of yourself, but also taking care of them. Don't take care of others at the expense of yourself, because then you start resenting them and you hate them, and it creates a lot more problems than you realize. And when you ask them for anything, and here, Saltumuhunna, ask them, it's the female. When you ask the females for anything, when you ask the females, aka the women of the Prophet, his wives, his daughters, then ask them from behind a screen. فَاسْأُلُوهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَاءِ حِجَابٍ, which we'll talk about what that means in a second, because there's a very interesting verse coming up. That is more pure for your hearts and for their hearts. Now, we start seeing that God and the Quran prescribes a specific protection mechanism around the wives of the Prophet and around the women of the Prophet. Extra protection for the wives, but for the women of the Prophet, for the people within the household of the Prophet. And it's to protect them from the devil's influence, let's just say. So it creates all these rules. So it's saying if you're going to talk to them behind a barrier. What does that mean? It could mean the hijab, the niqab, where they're like everything completely. It could mean like a physical screen, like when people go to confession in churches and they have like between them and the priest a screen. They're saying just something has to be between you and them to protect your hearts and your hearts. It's pure for your hearts and their hearts, that which feel. And it's not for you to harm the messenger of God, nor that you are allowed to marry his wives from after him ever. You're not allowed to marry the Prophet's wives after him ever, which is like a very interesting, like shouldn't they be able to be married afterwards? There's definitely a reason for this that might be just beyond us. Indeed, that is for God huge, enormous. It's very, very important for God that nobody marry the wives of the Prophet from after it. Which is, interesting. It's just, again, we have a lot of extra conditions that allow the Prophet to marry specific situations, do more, but he also has to protect more, and there are also more conditions on how to preserve his marriages, his households, because it's very specific in order to be protected. Interesting. إن تبدو شيئا أو تخفوه فإن الله كان بكل شيء عليما. If whether you reveal something or you hide it, conceal it, then indeed God knows about everything. Knows God about everything He knows. God has knowledge of all things. We know this. لا جناح عليهن في آبائهن ولا أبنائهن ولا إخوانهن ولا أبناء إخوانهن ولا أبناء أخواتهن ولا نسائهن ولا ما ملكت أيمانهن واتقين الله إن الله كان على كل شيء شهيدا. Huh? Anyway, there is no blame upon them. So we've set a bunch of conditions of what they have to kind of preserve, but they don't have to preserve these conditions against their fathers or their sons or their brothers or the sons of their brothers or the sons of their sisters, and nor their women. Huh? Now here they've added their fellow Muslim women, but that's not what the word is saying. وَلَا نِسَائِهِنَّ. It's that same word that I've been saying doesn't mean wives, it means women. Huh? وَلَا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانَهُمْ. And not what they rightfully possess. Which again, are we talking about bondspeople? Why would we be talking, why would they be fine to have no barrier in front of the people that they own? What does that mean? Why does that make sense? I do not understand ma malakat aymanahum. I know that they're talking about bondspeople. It just doesn't make sense to me. There's something I need to understand about this, and it's just, I'm struggling with it. And be mindful of God. Indeed, God was over everything a witness. Yeah. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. Okay, this is a very interesting thing because we do this in every prayer. Indeed, God and His angels pray upon the Prophet. Pray upon. So send blessings to the Prophet. We talked about this before, and I'm going to cover that verse in a second. O you who believe, pray upon him and greet him with multiple greetings. Now, in every prayer, at the end of every prayer, we say, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. God, pray, in this context, send your blessings upon Muhammad and the people of Muhammad, as you did upon Abraham and the people of Abraham. And then it's also wa barak ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad, which means send. Barak is send blessings. Sallu is pray. So it is both. That's strange. Wasallimu tasliman. And and greet him a greeting. With greetings. We say this also at every prayer. Assalamu alaikum ayyuhan nabi wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We say this upon it. And I remember hearing this and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But didn't we say that God also prays upon the 43, bro? Didn't we say that God also prays upon the God is the one who prays upon you and His angels so that He may bring you out of the darkness. So He's not just praying upon the Prophet, which this is what I first was taught, and I was like, why do we pray upon the Prophet? Why do we say hi? And then someone pointed out this verse to me. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I'm like, okay, but a few verses before it says we pray upon everybody. So it just surprised me that it wasn't unique to the Prophet. Yeah, I don't know. It's just a bit interesting. إن الذين يؤذون الله ورسوله لعنهم الله في الدنيا والآخرة وأعد لهم عذابا مهينا. Indeed, those who harm the God and His messengers, or who intend harm to God and His messengers, God has cursed them in this world and the hereafter, and He has prepared for them a punishment that is humiliating. Yeah, these explanations I'm not going to bother. والذين يؤذون المؤمنين والمؤمنات بغير ما اكتسبوا فقد احتملوا بهتانا وإثما مبينا. So first we talk about the Prophet, but then those who harm, see, it's the same word, يؤذون, but here they said annoy, and here they've said harm, which is like, anyway, and those who harm the believing men and the believing women, other than what they have earned, like if they've done something wrong and then they needed to suffer as a result of it from a consequence, that's different. But if they've done it without them doing anything wrong, then certainly they bear a false accusation and sin that is manifest. A guilt of slander and blatant sin. Nice, clear. So it's not just the Prophet, it's also for everybody. But I mean, obviously with the Prophet, it's worse. He's condemned by God and the world and the hereafter, prepared for humiliating punishment. And then the last verse for today is a very interesting verse because it touches upon a topic that is quite significant, and we're going to talk about multiple times in the Quran. يا أيها النبي قل لأزواجك وبناتك ونساء المؤمنين يدنين عليهن من جلابيبهن ذلك أدنى أن يعرفن فلا يؤذين وكان الله غفورا رحيما. Profile could be wrong. He's not God touched. Prophet could be wrong. He's not God touched. Very interesting comment, and I'd love to actually discuss it. But let me first dissect this specific verse. You look like you want to know. Of course I do. I always want to know. And I have a lot of opinions about what you're saying. But you aren't there. Okay, I have a lot of opinions about what you're saying, Machu Pao, but let me just finish this verse and then I'll end the episode and then we can get into it. What is this verse saying? O Prophet, say to your wives and your daughters and the women of the believers to draw upon themselves from outer garments, jalabihin. Why should they put the outer garments? That is more suitable than they should be known, lest they be harmed. Which is kind of interesting. So it's saying put on the outer garments so that you're not known and so that you're not harmed. One sec, bro. So that they're not known and they're not harmed, and that's why they should wear the outer garments. And God was oft forgiving and most merciful. First of all, the Quran is saying that if they are known, they can be harmed. Which, honestly, if you've spoken to a woman in this modern day and age, the Me Too movement happened because it's a real thing. Women get abused so much by loved ones, by family members, by random people on the streets. Like, it's kind of just, it's crazy. So some form of protection is needed to make sure that they are protected and make sure that they're given. Next, the word that is being used is jalabi bihinna, which means their outer garments, which some people are like, oh, this means the scarf. I'm like, it doesn't. I don't think jalabi bihinna is the clothing, as far as I understand that word. If you type that word to figure out what it means, it doesn't necessarily mean scarf. It doesn't necessarily mean all that jazz. So, very interesting. And yeah, we will talk about the scarves at a later date because there are other verses that talk about it, but this is one of the verses that people bring up when they're kind of talking about it. But essentially the concept is they need it for protection. And I completely understand because women do need to be protected considering the amount of sexual violation that men do, which is very frustrating. But that's it for today. I'm sure we'll talk upon the topic of outer garb at a little bit later date. And I appreciate you all for watching. As usual, as always, end with Sadaqallahu al-Ali al-Azim. And I will catch you guys tomorrow. But stick around, Machipao. I'm going to continue the conversation with you. Now, let me just finish recording the episode that I was doing. Sadaqallahu al-Ali al-Azim. See you guys tomorrow. Ma'as-salama.